Welcome to Awaken Now What? I'm your spiritual awakening coach, JR.
And I'm your master energy healer, Dr. Helen. Awaken Now What is a podcast that illuminates your spiritual awakening and ascension.
On today's episode, we're going to be talking about how we can heal trauma by smoking weed.
That's right. On today's episode, we have Joe DiNardo, who is a life transformation coach, certified psychedelic therapist. He actually performed a cannabis ceremony with my friend Joshua Best. Let's welcome Joe and Josh to the show.
How you guys doing today?
Oh, pretty good. How's it going?
Joe, can you explain for our listeners what cannabis-assisted psychedelic therapy is?
Sure, JR. Yeah, thank you for the question. So, cannabis-assisted psychedelic therapy is my preferred modality in supporting others explore themselves. So, cannabis-assisted psychedelic therapy is inducing a psychedelic state with the intentional use of cannabis. So, I can go into what that looks like and the actual ceremonial side of it, sort of high-level structure, what we did with Joshua. And essentially, the reason why someone would do it and sort of get a sense of actually what it is you have someone, a guide like me, supporting you either over Zoom, which is what I did with Joshua, or I do it in person here in my home, or I travel to others. And essentially what it is we bring a certain reverence to cannabis that it used to have and still does in some cultures. But it's essentially leveraging the power of cannabis as a tool of personal deep healing and transformation. So what that looks like is we generally start with a imbibing prayer. So we go through the process of calling in certain, based on my pre-session with the client, I'll probably bring in certain elements, whether it's spiritual or non-spiritual, into the space to sort of help ground us and open the container. We imbibe or we smoke with cannabis. You can also ingest it with edibles. And basically it is being extremely slow and intentional and checking in with the body of how we're feeling, how the client is feeling as they're imbibing. So as the THC and the cannabis is coming on and they're starting to feel a shift in their state of being, we're always checking in with the body and seeing how do we want to smoke more? Are we good? Do we not smoke anymore? And then after we finish the imbibing prayer, they lay down, usually with an eye mask, and then I guide them through a body scan. So I can get into why I do the things that I do, but the theme to keep in mind and why I use cannabis is specifically because of how helpful it is in connecting with the body. So it's a very somatic medicine, somatic meaning body-based, which is, to me, where a lot of my own personal transformation healing has been, is the more that I've connected to my body, the more that I've felt the feelings in my body, got out of the head and into the body, the more my world has expanded and opened. And I've seen this with others as well and clients. And that's why I feel so called to bring this medicine forward. So back to the structure a bit. After the body scan, then the intention of that is to really have them get into their body, especially if you're familiar. For a lot of people, the come up of THC can be kind of racy and anxiety inducing and very in the head. The body scan is there to really slow, relax. I'll introduce some breath work, light breath work, just again, into the body, always. And then a music set that I curate will play. And the music is intended to bring up certain, not necessarily specific emotions, but it is designed to be evocative in the sense that there's a build, there's crescendo, and then there's a peak, and then we sort of go through that wave of like other psychedelics in a psychedelic journey. And then throughout that process, we have a dialogue. I'm helping guide them into their body more, bringing their awareness to their body. Sometimes people are more silent, and it really depends on every person. I am just there to hold space and have their nervous system feel so supported that they can go to places they maybe wouldn't otherwise go.
That's amazing work. Amazing work. Thank you for what you do. Joshua, you had a session with Joe? What made you seek out this type of modality and therapy?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say for me, it's because it was just like basically my journey as someone who actually smokes marijuana. So I think like I started out just like many people do, just maybe like in high school, like and you just do it. But I was doing it therapeutically, and so in my own just spiritual journey, I'm speaking to therapists. I've done things like holotropic breathing and a lot of different modalities in those discoveries. Talking to like Helen and that very serendipitously brought me to Joe. I was like, okay, yeah, this is, even though like I've done cannabis before, this would be like a good intro as to like what, like a first step before I do something, that's arguably more intense. We actually set intentions way before the ceremony even started. And then so those things actually just make you become more aware and intentional of like, oh, where am I at in life? And then you're setting intentions again the day of. And then so it actually, I felt like just was like another level or evolution or maturation of like where I am.
What did you see and what emotions arose during the session with Joe?
One of the prevailing themes, and this is something where it kind of goes back to like one time where I talked to a therapist before, whereas one thing I like about smoking and just in general is like just seeing things through different perspectives, right? And I think that's also like something I try to do socially as well. Like, on a very simple level is I see like we're all guilty in more or less ways of like living in an echo, for example, right? And we just like have our little bubble and things reinforcing it. So like one way, especially when I was younger, I used to be like, all right, how do I break myself out of like this echo chamber, or like, how do I see myself from an angle that I like that gives me more awareness of myself? Is I used to try to like see myself through the eyes of other people, right? Like, how is Jay looking at me right now? How's Helen looking at me right now? How's Joe looking? If I try to put myself in your shoes and look at myself, that it helps me like check myself. I noticed that came up again, and that was a bit unexpected. But then the way it did was it was more like in the sense of a timeline. And then I remember it was like imagine like you're looking at yourself in a mirror, and then a mirror breaks, and then there's just like different fragments of you just kind of like scattered in different places, like a kind of broken mirror. And then it really then makes me then it made me then think about just like the certain decisions you make, and then just how like the reflections of yourself are important, so to speak.
Joe, do you have anything to add on why somebody would choose a guide or intentional use of cannabis?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, and to answer that, I'll actually riff off of what because Joshua hit on really some big key points, really in general psychedelic therapy, but to your question, Helen, specifically cannabis-assisted psychedelic therapy with a guide. So the presence of a guide in any sort of vulnerable space is invaluable. It's something that's felt, not really something that can be for people that have never had a guide and are used to solo journeys or doing their own thing. There's a time and space for that, absolutely, and especially with people who, I would say, most types of trauma. But that's the big point of what I want to touch on, is being trauma informed, which I am. All of my training has been through a trauma informed lens. It is extremely important that the nervous system feels safe. That again helps you access deeper layers that you maybe wouldn't otherwise be able to address. So specifically, cannabis, Helen, is, again, I mentioned the somatic portion of it. It is so body based. So all of the cannabinoid receptors live in the fascia. They live in a bunch of areas, but a lot of them are in the fascia of the body. So as some may know, the fascia runs from the top of the head all the way through the body. It innervates into all the muscles down to the feet. And because of this, a lot of times people can experience shaking, movement. Again, being a very body-based medicine, it can help us access trauma and stuck emotions that we wouldn't otherwise be able to access if we're sort of talking about it with someone in the logical brain and the structured mind. So I am of the school of thought that is similar to the Bessel van der Kolk book, The Body Keeps the Score, which as a high-level summary is just trauma, emotions, things that we experience in childhood get stuck in the body. They can manifest in certain physical manifestations. Low back pain is a very common one. And there's other ones like that. So through cannabis-assisted therapy with a guide, it is very helpful. The cannabis helps bring up whatever the emotion is, and then the guide helps you. Help clients and others do this work as well, but help navigate what the emotion is. So for a lot of people, especially in this world that we live in, nothing wrong with the masculine. I also love masculine and feminine polarities and talking about that. So in this very masculine-centered world, we're living it very much in the head, very heady, very logical. There's nothing wrong with that. And a lot of times that's how people tend to approach their journeys. And sometimes that can be helpful, but I truly believe you're going to hit a point where you cannot go further until you get more into the feminine side of things, which is the emotions, the feelings, what is present here right now without attaching a story to it, right? So just what's here now in the body.
I'll definitely have to try sometime.
Oh, that's saying a lot, Joe.
Yeah.
You got JR to get interested because he's a no weed person.
Yeah, I get really high whenever I do smoke. One hit is all I need, and I'm high for like 8 hours.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm your guy actually. So like, sorry, so this boy, I'll shut up in a second. But like, he get attached to you. So like, one thing is he invites you to smoke, and he says does a great job of saying as much or as little as you want to, right?
Yep, that's my cap. A 5 milligram gummy will put me over the top.
Yeah.
Joe, I have a curious question.
Yeah.
When did you start? How did you find out about this modality actually? And I'm sure you went through a session yourself.
Yeah.
And what was your first time like?
Sure. Yeah. Good question. And before I answer that, I want to say, JR, I would be honored to support you in the journey if you feel called. It's
5 milligram gummy is all I need.
Yeah, great. That's perfect. We would have a time. And what I was gonna say is, knowing your body, to Joshua's point, it's like a lot of people don't know their body, right? A lot of people are disconnected from their body. So the real awareness that you two are naming here, I mean, is phenomenal and it's great. And like, we work with that. The whole point, what also can be so healing outside of the actual medicine itself, is what as Joshua mentioned, I'm always bringing in choice, agency, invitation. There's inviting you to connect to your body. I'm not going to tell you how much to smoke. Your body knows how much it wants to smoke, So I'm also always bringing, cannabis is a very empowering tool in that sense as well. Yes, we're leveraging these plant medicines that are here for us and can be supportive allies, and there's always choice. There's always agency in you knowing what is best for you. So just wanted to name that. To answer your question, I feel called. It's just part of the journey for me. So honestly, the start of it for me was an ayahuasca experience. It was about, 4 years ago at this point, and I got the download shortly after then that I wanted to be a facilitator of some kind. And I wasn't sure exactly what that meant. I came back. I just started looking into it. I'd already sat for friends and family with mushrooms and other psychedelics informally, but I organically was just sort of becoming in that role, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. To me, it is so, and it still is now, obviously, even more so. It's just such sacred work. And I know that it is part of what my soul is here to do, is support the collective consciousness in this revolution that I feel that we are in the middle of. And part of my journey is figuring out where I weave on the tapestry that is this consciousness renaissance that we're in the middle of. And I wasn't sure exactly what it looked like then. So I honestly just Googled it, and I found there is a group. It's called the Center for Medicinal Mindfulness, based out of Boulder. It is a educational training program that is designed to support people moving professionally into this work. So I just felt like, absolutely, this was it. This was amazing. And it's all above board. It's all legal. And they use cannabis. So in Colorado, we have the privilege where we can do that, which is nice. There's also cannabis and ketamine assisted therapies and clinics that are, again, all legal. Ketamine's a little bit of a different thing, but they mainly use cannabis. And yeah, there's many hours. There's a credentialing process. There's an approval process, and you have to get your own practicum hours as part of it. And for me, I did it over the course of, I think it was about 2 years. It's a self-paced program, which is a great element to it. And honestly, yeah, I was skeptical. Like, cannabis? What do you mean? What do you mean cannabis? You mean weed? Like, what do you mean? I call cannabis, but I just suspended the disbelief. And yeah, my first journey, I remember it vividly. It was at the time, I think this was either right around the start of COVID. I don't quite remember. So it was 3 years ago. Anyway, whatever it was. And it was over Zoom, and I was in my bedroom, and we had our first journey. It follows a similar structure. I've sort of kept it. I've modified it to be more the way I like to do things, but the structure is the same. It's imbibing prayer, body scan, 2.5 hour guided music. And it was a group, so there wasn't that one, which I love groups too. We can talk about that, but in a group, you're not going to get that one-on-one guiding when you noticing, because really the role of the facilitator is you're sort of managing the energy of the whole space and the collective energy. So it blew me out of the water. And I was always like somewhat recreational smoker. It wasn't often, but I would say it was often, but it wasn't daily. And I remember opening after they brought us back, taking off the eye mask and just like coming back. And I felt such energy in my body. I remember saying it was either that weekend, because it was a weekend intensive. It was either the first ceremony, maybe the second, where it just hit me in my body of, this is what I'm here to do. This medicine, this ceremony, this is it. I thought it was ayahuasca. I thought it was maybe these other things. And again, I was just so new to cannabis as an intentional psychedelic tool. A lot of people don't consider cannabis as a traditional psychedelic. To me, it absolutely is. Just it's right there with everything else. And I'll share what I used to think. Well, let me back up. So that was the start of it. And then I've gone through all the levels of training through then, all the way leading up to, which I actually really like, which is combining cannabis and breath work. So same sort of format and structure of the cannabis ceremony, except we start after the body scan, we start with about, it can vary, but 40 minutes of active breath work. Not holotropic. It's a very specific type of breath work, just because you already have the activation of cannabis. Whereas when you're doing breathwork alone, I feel in my experience, because I'm also actually separate of cannabis, I'm also a breathwork facilitator. And I like breathwork as well, again, because it's all about coming into the body, and it's a very somatic focused modality. So cannabis breathwork, I have had transcendental, some of the most intense experiences of my life. And it's been an actually cannabis breathwork journeys where it's absolutely felt like a DMT trip. I'm doubled over like into a trash can, dry heaving, because a level of activation that is there for that. From the first time to now, it's been just a getting to know of this cannabis spirit, because she's a feminine spirit, just like all the other plant medicines. I feel they have masculine and feminine traits. Cannabis is very feminine. She's a lot of trickster energy. She's a lot of what I like to say is temptress too. Is like, that's why a lot of people, I think, abuse her, and I get it. There's no shame as to why that is. Culturally, there's a lot of stuff there as well. But without intention and guiding it, that's what the feminine needs, right? The feminine is chaos, is creation, is beauty. Joshua mentioned the creativity that he's come out of it with, which is very common. With that energy, you need to bring some focus and attention and that masculine sort of edge of like, let's go this direction. So once you can channel it, and then the feminine energy can flow, and the healing that's there is, in my experience, just unlike anything else.
You touched on this with other psychedelics. Can these same benefits be achieved through, say, like psilocybin, LSD, DMT, and you explain the main differences of cannabis and the benefits of cannabis assisted therapy. But have you tried it with these other psychedelics?
Yeah, yeah, great question. The answer is yes, to all of the ones that you mentioned. And in my experience, psychedelics bring you to the same space. So it's that transpersonal space, which is sort of, ego. I mean, ego's there, but ego rest. And this is part of Joshua. What I was gonna mention was you had sort of mentioned like a mirror breaking, and there's like all these pieces of you. So that was just a really good description of the transpersonal space. And psychedelics, breath work, in my experience, they all bring you there to this place, this sort of non-self, non-3D place where you have access to information, data, sometimes be other beings that you wouldn't otherwise have. So to answer your question, JR, I believe the space that you quote unquote go to is different offshoots but basically the same organism of I'll say of the same place. But how you can interact with that space is different depending on which psychedelic and which medicine you're using. Now, there's certain things you need to keep in mind, right? Ayahuasca and cannabis don't play well together. The certain different shamans have different rules about. You want to make sure. Oh yeah. What I've heard is generally 30 days. Make sure if you're going to have an ayahuasca experience, do not smoke. At least 2 weeks is what I've heard. But the shamans that at least are my folks with and others have had very intense experiences when someone comes into ceremony when they just smoked cannabis like a couple days prior. So there are certain things you want to be aware of, and that's again with someone you trust, doing research and all this other stuff. But with all these tools, they're great for different purposes. So yeah, actually, the last thing I'll share with that though too is, again, I know this isn't everyone's experience, but in mine, something like psilocybin, certainly ayahuasca. When I kind of mentioned that analogy of like the doors, there's like this kind of scary door, and then there's like this blissful door. In my experience with other psychedelics, is like you get dragged into the thing you're trying to avoid. Or you guys have heard the what is it? The archetype of like the grandmother ayahuasca with like the wooden spoon. She'll just crack you like into it, and that can be a lot. Sometimes you need that totally. Like that again, there's like a time and a space for that. But again, with certain amount of trauma, with where you are in your life, that may not be the most supportive.
Yeah, it's amazing that you bring that up because we, for the listeners out there, we should be extremely, extremely careful and intentional when using these psychedelics. We can easily traumatize or re-traumatize ourselves through use of psilocybin, DMT, LSD, and I've done that. I've traumatized myself using those substances. But the cannabis assisted ceremony can be extremely beneficial and a great starting point. Josh, I'm curious to know the type of transformation post session. What was life like after the session, and do you still reap the benefits?
So for me, the benefits, I would say, because I've been experienced of doing it on my own for a while, it's something much more simple than I guess anything that may be as like profound and life changing. But for example, on my own, like I said, I would have these journeys, and then I would learn from them, and I would know what it is. But now after like having, a teacher or sitter, I've learned so much from a teacher is that it's like, okay, whereas sometimes maybe on my own, I know, okay, cool, I'm gonna clear the environment, I'm gonna burn my sage, I'm about to go there, right? So that's still being intentional, right? But then another level of what are my intentions? Where am I right now? Now it's, like the last time I did it on my own, like I very specifically meditated, and so, it's so basically it's just, I felt like it just evolved me that much more in terms of like how to have a journey like on my own. Cause like, now I know to be a lot more tuned with my, really ground myself. So all those, tools of the trade, that I did with during the sitting session, I could then now incorporate into my own daily practice.
Yeah, I don't want to take a minute, Joshua, and just celebrate you, brother. I mean, your level of intention and like awareness
Oh, I
that you
appreciate
have
it.
with yourself and how you are approaching your own hero's journey with these plant medicines and these teachers is commendable. So I want you to know that. I do see that.
No, I appreciate it. And and that's why I'm glad you guys or you all exist really, because I think it's yeah, one thing I just can't help but say again, I appreciate where society has evolved to and is continuing to evolve to. And then like with that being said is I think, we all grew up, we're all around the same age. So we grew up with like Dare and all these things. So that's like, kind of made a lot of these things that are actually helpful, but it kind of like demonized those things. And actually part of like, we talked about trauma. I feel like also too, that's part of what I need to do before I do those things is like kind of unpack, like, hey, those programs work for me. Like, I never did cocaine, but because I grew up thinking like, hey, if I do like one line, one time, I'm going to be on a street corner for the rest of my life. Like, and so like just the idea of like for example, actually we have a friend, Alex, like Helen knows Alex, but he was actually, so he's at, he does exactly what we're talking about. So he's in a community where there's a lot of sitters and psilocybin journeys, cannabis journeys. And so let's talk about like, for example, MDMA therapy, right?
I was about to bring that up.
So I'm open to it. Yeah. So I'm open to it, but I know before I try it, I need to like get out of the imagery of like ecstasy, party drug, it'll burn my brain. Like, it's because I know if I still have those biases in my mind, in my internal, it's for sure going to impact my experience, right?
Yeah. Consciousness renaissance. That is how I like to think of it.
Yeah.
Psychedelics are under that umbrella there, and there's other things besides that, but that's a very big part of it, Joshua. And you're really touching on some big stuff there. The unlearning is a lengthy process. You're in it and you're getting there, and we all are. And it's like, yeah, society does its things to with us.
We have a friend who does MDMA ceremonies. It's Clarissa, right, Helen? She does that. I'm
Yeah, well,
very
she's in
curious.
training to do like the psychedelic
What did you know that?
facilitations.
I know Clarissa.
Yeah.
Well,
Mhm.
Oh yeah.
I wanted to backtrack a little bit, and Josh, I think the listeners would be curious. Joe is doing such a great job of sharing how the cannabis journey can take you into your soma. So I was wondering what that was like for you.
Oh, that's actually a brilliant question. And I'm actually glad you asked that. So I remember being on the bed and then just like, and when I was doing the breath work, I don't really, it's like weird, sometimes you have the visualization, but you can't articulate it. So I still have it in my head. I could feel and see just like the different cells in my body being like activated nonetheless, and then so it's like, so it was cleansing, right? It's like, because again, I think like, another like life analogy is, when I was first going to the gym, like, in high school, you learn to lift weights. I had like a trainer, but then like, there's like a proper breathing form, that you're supposed to do of like when you inhale, there's health reasons why you do it that way. But then I remember like, I would always naturally hold my breath. Like a lot of people straining, but then when you learn to like properly breathe while you're lifting that weight, it actually becomes easier. Your body is more in sync. Incorporating breath work into the cannabis journey, it's like that same thing of like, oh, I was like really straining before because, you may get anxious, like, just stop breathing. You may be clenching or whatever. And it's like, oh, part of what I can do or part of what facilitates this whole thing is being in tune to myself, breathing, and it releases a lot of that anxiety. And not just releases the anxiety, again, I felt like it's like cleansing. You're like activating your body. You're making sure that energy is being taken in and then going and letting it flow through you to where it needs. And it was like, to me, all really like an attunement and an alignment at the same time. Just like both like the ethereal and the somatic, and just getting them all on the same page.
I'm gonna give you props, just as Joe did. Josh, you've achieved, and we can tell that you've achieved levels and levels of healing. And we've preached time and time again that the best way to heal the world is to heal yourself. So kudos to you, props to you, and can't wait to see
Thanks,
where
man.
you go moving forward. Uh,
No, I appreciate it.
yeah. One last curious question for Joe from me. What type of are there any type of strains that you use in your ceremony? Like, are you using some Cali Kush, or like what's going on there?
Yeah. Yeah, great question. So I actually don't use specific strains. Josh mentioned
Oh.
it earlier. What the thing that I do always do is we're making what I call the ceremonial blend is a third, just making sure that it's a third sativa dominant, a third indica dominant, and a third hybrid, like a true hybrid dominant. You equally combine the three of them. Ideally, it's always organic, and also ideally for me, it's always flower. So I'm not a fan of, again, no judgment, but for what I do is I'm not a fan of carts or any sort of. I just prefer organic, fresh, grown from the earth, or maybe in a lab. That's gonna be okay. I really like experimenting with like from the earth flower, though, like real flower. To me, that's how you capture the essence and the spirit and the energy of it. Because a lot of times people just, it's like kind of about how many THC crystals can we shove into, even a flower or like a cart. And that to me is just not the way. It's a way, but I just much prefer that. So anyway, yeah, to answer your question, I don't have specific ones. I have my favorites. I have ones that I will always, I recognize that when I tell people, because especially if it's over Zoom, right? Like with Joshua, he had a per curious zone. So it's different in Maryland than it is in Colorado. I've sat for others too on the East Coast and around. And what I always say is, tell me what it is that, you have access to, and then I'll give you feedback of what I think you should do. But in my experience, it doesn't make a huge difference when you're going certain strains over others outside of, do you know? Like, do you know, for example, I know I love a good Blue Dream. Like, if I can get organic Blue Dream, yeah, you know what I mean? Yeah, it's just people do
I'm
it.
curious.
Yeah. It's just knowing your body and how it responds to the terpenes, the flavor profile. I mean, you can really dive into that. I don't usually go to that level because generally, again, with people, a lot of people actually is just like have never done this before. They maybe don't know cannabis that well. So, hey, just keep it simple. These are the three most important things. Whatever you can get, you can get. And then the more that I work with people, even in my own journey, it's like, ooh, okay, now I get to really I like this one. Or, okay, instead of a third, let me try more of like a third, a half, and like another, a quarter or something.
Right. Change that dynamic if you do that, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So an example is someone I actually sat for recently gets extremely anxious. So, and again, that it was 2 hits. And I mean, we didn't even get to the eye mask or the body scan because she was so activated. It was very scary for her. So we spent the entire journey literally talking like this. That's what she needed. Something would come up, and then we would just like kind of be with it and talk with it. But she couldn't actually lay down and put the eye mask on because some people respond to cannabis in this way. It actually is too activating. So how do we titrate it? And I bring that up because with her, instead of a third, I said, actually, since you get so racy and anxious, which is generally coming from the sativa, I said, do way less sativa. So bring in more indica. Indica's more body, more like kind of more sort of lower energy. Sativa's higher energy and generally visual, creative, but with that can come the raciness. So the reason why I say the third is they balance each other out. So the indica balances out the raciness, the sativa balances out the tiredness that can come from an indica. Hybrid can be a little more heart opening, a little more balanced. So anyway, you're exactly right, JR. So changing the amounts absolutely affects the experience.
It's the importance of approaching it with reverence and also building a ritual and ceremony, having that sacred experience with it rather than just, the recreational smoking. And it's an evolution, revolution, like you said.
Yes. Yeah, and then that changes everything. The intention and the sacredness completely changes the experience of smoking.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have reached the now what part of our episode. Joe, Josh, we've learned so many insightful things about cannabis-assisted ceremonies and therapies. What last words, let's start with you, Josh. What last words of advice do you have for the listeners out there who are curious about this modality?
I would actually say like approach it with like a scientific curiosity to discover and like know yourself. Now what I would just say, just do it, and then even if it's like that first experience doesn't necessarily go in a way that it may turn you off at first, quite frankly. But I think like the lessons, as we're saying, like have a sitter or try it again, or like, hey, like, yeah, it may not feel good at first or whatever, but that doesn't necessarily mean there's nothing to be gained from it.
Amazing words, Joshua. Joe, what is your now what for the listeners out there?
Now what is, ask yourself the question of what is my relationship to cannabis? What are the thoughts? What are the judgments? What's my relationship to cannabis? Am I using it daily? Am I using it, so infrequently? Am I so afraid of it? Just what it is. And really, I mean this is important. There's no agenda here. There's no like, there's right or there's wrong, or even daily use is bad. There is none of that. And I just invite the listeners to be open to what an expansive, intentional ceremony with cannabis could bring up for them. And just like being curious about it.
And Joe, for the listeners out there who are seeking you out for a cannabis-assisted ceremony, where can they find you?
Yeah. So my Instagram is joe.embodied. That's it. And then my website is embodiedhealingwithjoe.com. So those are probably the two best places. There's a lot of info on cannabis-assisted therapy if you want to dive more into it on my website.
Amazing. Josh, where can the listeners find you for tips and advice on the cannabis-assisted ceremony?
I would say my Instagram. So it's Migrant Mejor. So like MIGRANT. Mejor is MEJOR. And then I also have my own podcast and such, like, especially if those are like interested in like spiritual journeys, but like journeys in terms of like the travel sense. You can find me on my Instagram at like Why We Travel.
I'll make sure to put all your info, guys, in the show notes. Joe, Joshua, it's been such a pleasure having you on the show. We've learned so much about cannabis ceremonies. Thank you guys so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
And I appreciate you having the platform.
Yeah.
Thank you.
If you like this episode, please subscribe. I'm your spiritual awakening coach, JR.
And I'm your master energy healer, Dr. Helen. Till next time, everyone.